Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. I did a little research for this episode. For all of you listening who maybe have, I don't want to use the word skeptical husbands or partners, but husbands or partners who are just like not quite on your level yet in terms of wanting to get support, wanting to get testing. We've talked so much about how to support your male partner's fertility. But what if you're at that stage of your journey where they're still in that, like, let's just keep trying? It's not a problem, relax sort of mentality. We hear that a lot. And so back in the summer or early spring, it was early spring, back in May-ish, I'd hopped on some FCM clarity calls. So I was having these initial conversations with partners, with couples, and I was having that conversation with a lot of partners where they were just like supportive, but also like not quite there yet. So before we dig into today's episode, actually, let me just give a quick thank you to our amazing Fertility Confidence podcast sponsor, Needed. And in the theme of our male focus episode today, I wanted to let you know that they actually have two amazing products for male fertility. They put out a prenatal, a multivitamin that is tailored specific towards men. And I do love looking at this one for some of our clients because it does have higher levels of things like zinc and selenium that we often want to see and use in our male personalization plans, that if we can get that in one product, like easy peasy. They also make a wonderful Sperm Support Plus product that has some probiotics. We've talked in the podcast before about how microbiome is playing a role in fertility, as well as some well-researched herbs to help boost testosterone, which therefore will also help boost sperm production. So I just wanted to give a little plug for those two amazing products, and our wonderful friends at Needed have offered you guys 20% off your very first purchase with Needed over at thisisneeded.com using the code Dr. Kelsey. So thank you, Needed. So first and foremost, before we get into why this conversation is important, I'm actually going to share some of the feedback. I had this conversation inside our Fertility Confidence Method community. I asked the women if your partner was feeling a little bit hesitant to get support or to get help, like, what did that conversation look like for you? Because I feel like that's always the first barrier, right? Of like, how do we have this conversation where it maybe doesn't turn into an argument? And that's like a whole nother ball game in terms of where we're not going to unpack that. Okay. We're not going to unpack like relationship dynamics here. And I'm going to try to keep my opinions very neutral on the subject. My team knows that I can get very, very heated in this arena. So I'm going to share some of what our clients said, like from their partners, what helped them feel comfortable to not just come in and work with us specifically, but to just get support, make changes, do testing, those very kind of like basic things that you might be ready for, that he might not be ready for. And then I'll actually share with you just some little tips I have in terms of why this is important and what you can sort of infuse into your conversation to help share your thoughts and feelings around why this is important. And of course, sharing this episode with your partner as well will always hopefully be helpful. So when it comes to male fertility and male testing, I do think there still is this not understood dynamic of getting pregnant. And I think this is a very old age way of thinking. And I do believe that our generation, and I have actually seen it in the 8 years that I've been doing this shift in dynamic of it not just being a female problem, but it being a problem of both men and women potentially. But still, I think some of our partners, some of our husbands that come in and work with us inside Fertility Confidence Method or start to listen to this podcast or follow me on Instagram, there is still surprise that comes from hearing the statistics around male factor fertility, because we don't really talk about male fertility all that much. And whenever I put any sort of content online on Instagram, but even in the podcast, the male episodes always download very well, get very well received, as well as the YouTube videos always are very well received. But anytime I put any sort of male fertility optimization content out on Instagram, it honestly does better, usually twice as better as typical content. And I don't believe it's because I have a very male focused platform. I do think it's really important to talk about, but I think it's because we're just starving for general understanding and appropriate research backed advice when it comes to fertility. And there are lots of avenues we can get that in the female space, but there actually isn't a lot out there from a male focused perspective. So there's still a lot of, I think, just unknown of like how important it is, right? And one of the things that we always share with our men who are a bit more hesitant in terms of getting support or having those testing conversations, who are feeling a little bit hesitant about testing, is that the reality is 30% of infertility cases is male infertility centric. Another 30% of infertility cases is a combination of male and female complications. That means 60% of all couples who are experiencing infertility have a male factor. So this is not nothing. This is not a small number, right? Like, getting involved in the process is incredibly important, because the reality is there's a 60% chance that there is some sort of male piece that needs to be optimized. And that's not a small number. So the statistics are on our side when it comes to the husbands and partners getting involved. So let me read through. I'm going to pull up my phone here. The one thing about this platform that we use is it kind of like shuffles the thingies a little bit. Okay, so what I asked, I said to my ladies in Fertility Confidence Method, if your partner or husband was skeptical about doing testing and or getting support, I'd love to know how you helped him understand why it's important. Because I think that that's always like the hardest part, right? So one of our amazing clients said, my husband really enjoyed listening and learning through specific episodes of this podcast, the Fertility Confidence Method podcast, as well as other fertility related podcasts, having evidence-based information presented in a way that is easy to digest with also some humor added, which, sidebar, someone telling me I'm funny is literally like the best compliment ever. I like to think I'm a really funny person. Which makes me sound very pathetic. But when I read that, I was like, oh my God, someone thinks I'm funny. Has gone a long way. Okay. So I think it also helps that he now feels his best after implementing some of the changes. So this was someone who started off feeling a little bit skeptical, but through his own research and understanding came to a place of being like, yes, this makes sense. And you'll see a theme, and obviously these are my clients. So like, disclaimer around, a lot of them said, I shared your podcast. So if this is a good kind of place to say, if you haven't shared this podcast with your partner, I would highly recommend it. We have lots of couples who we work with that both listen to the episodes, whether together or apart, and they share that with me when they come and join FCM. And it's always a really, it makes my heart feel so happy. But it brings this sense of partnership to this journey that I think is incredibly important. And we really believe in our space is actually a treatment tool. So how she really helped her partner understand that this was something that needed to be discussed, that we needed to address together, was by sharing the evidence and sharing the research. And that is one of my tips, is like, men, if you are listening, you will probably agree with this. And not everyone, obviously, we can't generalize the entire gender, but most men really think a lot more logically, numbers focused and numbers driven compared to women. And that's neither a good nor bad thing. It's just the way your brains work, right? And some women I also am very logical, research based. That's why FCM is very research driven. I would never, ever be a part of a profession and journey and have this, space where I was just like, yeah, like, sure, let's, chew on clover and see what happens. Like, that's not the vibe here. The vibe is, this is what the research says. This confirms the research. We're going to try it because of X, Y, Z. And that's typically what our partners need to and want to hear is like, show me the evidence, show me the proof. And so a lot of our episodes, I do try to kind of include some of those pieces in there, but figuring out from him, like, what do you need to feel comfortable that it's time to XYZ, whether that be have testing done or start discussing treatment or getting support, whether it be fertility clinic or in other avenues like fertility confidence method. And if it's, well, I just show me that it's worth, like, show me why. This is a very simple thing to do. He's really much just asking, like, show me the research. Like, where's the research to say I need to explore these avenues? Whereas for women, it's really easy for us to just be like, I need to explore these avenues. I need to, and it's not that your husbands and partners aren't willing to do whatever it is that they can to make a baby. It's just that sometimes they need to be actually shown that, like, this is legitimately the route that makes sense for me, right? Another one of our clients said, my husband didn't know a lot about this part of the journey. I gave him a few podcast episodes to listen to. Easy to understand the information based on the different studies, convinced him to change his diet and his lifestyle and do some more testing and do some supportive things. So again, someone who just really needed to hear the research and hear the literature so that he knew what he was doing was worthwhile, right? It's very much a different conversation to say, hey, hubby, here's 7 supplements I heard about on TikTok because your sperm probably sucks. You're going to take these for me, versus saying, hey, hubby, we've been trying to get pregnant for this amount of time. It hasn't happened yet. I'm starting to feel a little bit worried. I know you might not be there yet, and that's fine, but would you be open to doing some testing and just looking at some of the research that I've been looking at? Like, those are 2 very different ways to approach the conversation. One is very much a companionship, getting them involved, helping them take ownership, but also supporting them in understanding the evidence and that aspect of the journey. Whereas the other is just like, I'm just going to put all these supplements on the counter and you're going to take them because I heard about them on social media. Like, where's the proof, right? Where's the proof? So another one of our wonderful clients said, my husband has been supportive and willing to make lifestyle changes. He was a little more resistant earlier on in our journey. I asked him to do a semen analysis before we hit the 1-year mark, and he didn't understand why at first. So I had him listen to your podcast and explained how if something was off, it would take 3 months of changes to really see improvement. And if we did end up going to fertility clinic, it would be better if we walked into that state in our most optimal range as possible. And all of that was obviously a very good point, right? Like, maybe you don't need to walk and step foot into the fertility clinic right this second, but the sooner we have an understanding of what we're working with, the better. Because ideally, we want to try to keep you out of the fertility clinic, right? We want to be doing all of these things before we're even having the conversation about the fertility clinic, because once we're stepping over that threshold, things are going to actually feel like they're moving very, very quickly. And this client's not wrong. She's been around for a while. She's obviously listened to me speak. It's going to take 3 to 6 months if we find something in your semen analysis to really make changes, positive changes. And yes, those changes can happen, but they're going to take time. And when you are in the thick of your fertility journey, when you've hit that 1-year mark, let's say, time can feel like it's moving very fast, right? That biological clock, man, it's bullshit, but it's hard to turn off. And us women, we got it. Men, not so much, right? And that's okay. They're going to make sperm for forever. It's very different genetic biological clock going on here. So sometimes we have to help them understand that a little bit. And again, not in the sense of like, I'm running out of time, but like, let's be proactive with the time that we have. That is the best way. Another client said, my husband was very similar to everyone else. He was pretty on board for testing, especially when we found an at-home test. So we've talked about this in episodes before, where I actually share about this inside our male fertility program, our little like specific to men. It's an offshoot of FCM. It's called His Confidence. We talk about testing in there because I do feel like our, 90s television portrayal of fertility clinics. And I specifically think of this one, the Friends episode where Chandler and Monica are struggling to get pregnant and they go and do their testing. And Monica's like, okay, I'm going to go do mine. And, Chandler has to go into this room with the dirty pornos. And like, he knows 1,000 men have sat in there and taken their sample. And he's like, oh, I don't want to do this. It's not like that anymore. Okay. You can take your sample at home and drop it off. So I think just like getting through this narrative that you may have, like dudes may have in their head about what that looked like. Obviously, it's not that fun, but I promise you, women are going to have to go through a lot more tests, a lot more blood draws, a lot more uncomfortable things, stuff poking you everywhere through the fertility process. The longer you get into it, than you having to give a semen sample, potentially in the comfort of your own home. Okay. And if you can't get testing done through your doctor, then there are at-home options that you can use and send away that are good. They're not perfect, but they're better than nothing. Okay. So if that's something that's holding you back, there are workarounds for that. There was something else in here that I really wanted to read out. Oh, she also said he also was really supporting me since my body was going to be going through a lot with whatever road we ended up having to take on his journey. Partnership, right? He understood like, yes, this is a partnership, but at the end of the day, the woman in the partnership is likely going to have to go through a lot more testing. This is just like one thing that we can do to show companionship and partnership, which I think is really important. And then she talked a little bit more about like doing research. So they all kind of had a very similar theme. The last two here, one said the husband was skeptical about doing tests and joining FCM, but as we started the fertility clinic, I told him that FCM and generally like what she's saying is working on ourselves and optimizing our body was worth spending the money and time on to look at things deeper while we felt like we had time on our side, which is really important, right? The other interesting piece here is that it also seemed to help that our fertility clinic wouldn't give us a follow-up for results unless they had the full picture for both of us. So their clinic did a really great job at being like, we need both of you to get testing, right? We're not going to give out any plans or do anything unless we have the full picture, because there needs to be a whole couple approach to fertility care, which I really love. And then the last one here from one of our wonderful clients, she just said, I sent my husband your podcast, which is so lovely. He's always been supportive, but to get him more involved, he needed to hear and learn on his own, which is a very big trend here, right? In these answers. He's an engineer, so data and science are interesting to him. And that was the key to getting him to take control of his side of the fertility journey. And she even said, I honestly find it harder to get our fertility clinic on board than my husband when it comes to testing male stuff, which is a very common theme that we sometimes see. So the general consensus being men need to get there in their own time, right? And one of the ways that I think is the best to show and help them get there is to show the data and show the research. And so sharing this episode, sharing some of our other male fertility episodes are things that may help them feel more comfortable with taking that step in terms of testing and treatment. And listen, there's a really big ego thing, okay? I'm totally comfortable sharing and talking about it, even though I know a lot of men are going to probably listen to this episode, but to see on paper that your sperm might not be the best, obviously that's a very big hit to the male ego. And it's only natural for men to guard and protect themselves that way, right? That's a very vulnerable position to be in. It's also a very vulnerable position for women to feel as though they are the reason they're not getting pregnant. But women, we're more open to allowing ourselves to be in that vulnerable position. And therefore, we're more open to the discovery process of, is something wrong? We're okay with taking that journey because we're more comfortable with vulnerability, I think, on a larger scale. Whereas for men, there's this very genetic, like ancestral protective approach. Men are very protective of their partners and other people. Like that is just the built into their DNA, right? But it's also about themselves and their own egos. So I think the biggest thing to know and remember is first and foremost, if you do go and get testing done and your sperm are not great, you are not alone. Your friends might not be talking about it. Your family might not be talking about it. Maybe you don't have close friends and family that have been in the position that you are in, but there are other people in your position, millions of other people, and you are not alone. And the sad reality is that our male fertility has drastically declined over the last 60 years. We're seeing it in the research. We share some of that data inside FCM and in his confidence. And that alone should be a driving factor enough of like, if you want a family, if you want to make a baby, this is like a really easy thing you can do to just support that process and get the ball rolling and at least get all the information that you need and then figure out from there, what does that support piece look like? So one of the aspects I want you to kind of think about this, if you are a dude listening and you're like, oh, I'm just feeling a little uneasy, I'm skeptical, I don't know, I'm not there yet, let's just keep trying. Like those are the really common pieces that I hear. Like, let's just keep, my husband just wants to keep trying for a few more cycles and just like see if it happens. Dudes always want to just like let it happen, right? Because we all have this like fairy tale in our mind of when we decide to have kids, we just have lots of sex and it happens. That's, what we were taught in sex ed. It's what we assumed happened. It's just not the case for most couples, unfortunately. So I think a big piece of if your partner is starting to be concerned about not getting pregnant, if she's researching and you're noticing that she is spending a lot of time obsessing over the little details and making tweaks and things, I think one of the biggest things to remember is that this journey of building your family, it needs to be on a solid base of companionship and partnership. And being involved in the aspects of optimizing your fertility is not just a one-sided obstacle, right? It's a two-sided obstacle. And this is also true for couples who are just starting out. We need to really remove this narrative that preconception care, that preparing your body for pregnancy is only for women, because that's not the case. Sperm is 50% of the equation, and 50% of that baby's genetic DNA are coming from sperm. So if we think about, I want to bring a healthy, vibrant child into this world that is going to have the best chance at life possible, we want to care about the genetic material that child is being created from. And improving sperm quality is 50% of that process. But taking this concept of we want to make a baby away from just we get to have unprotected sex, woohoo, it's how do we really make sure we're doing this to optimize the health of our future family? And how can we do that together? Where does the companionship and the partnership come into play here? Because it's two sides. The other piece that I think is really important for men and women to hear and remember is that it doesn't need to be all or nothing. There's a lot of really extreme opinions out there on the internet of like all the things you need to do to not just make a baby, but have a healthy pregnancy and have healthy kids. And I think there needs to be more discussion around how we don't have to have this all or nothing approach. We talk a lot in FCM and here in the podcast how you don't have to be perfect to get pregnant, but you also don't have to live this very like rigid, clean, perfect lifestyle for this to happen. And it doesn't have to be the extremist all in or absolutely nothing. There's a very large spectrum and scale in terms of what is appropriate to optimize your fertility. And the good news is it's very dependent on you, right? Your plan, what you're doing to optimize your chances of making a baby should be tailored and specific to you and to your body. Not everything is going to work for you. And therefore, you don't need to do everything. So we have to eliminate this. And I'm saying this not just to men, but to women too. we need to eliminate this all or nothing. And I, as much as I love the internet, and we've talked about this a lot about how I have a very love-hate relationship with how I run a completely virtual business. I can't just not speak into the internet, or else no one will know that I'm here to help them. So I understand that I am contributing to the noise, but I hope so that I'm doing it in a way that feels of integrity to me, right? Of integrity to me is that I am very research based. I'm going to be very factual, and I feel confident with that approach. But there's a lot of noise on the internet of like, do this, do that, do this, do that, that it gets very confusing. And it can feel like you need to do a lot of things when in reality, you probably actually don't need to do everything. I had a client who came to work with us last year or earlier this year. I don't know. Time is eluding me here, but she had actually already worked with 2 different fertility practitioners before she came into FCM. And we went back and forth quite a bit because obviously she was feeling very skeptical. And so I just was like, this is what I do. I'm just going to like shoot it straight with you because you need to feel comfortable with me. And one of her practitioners, she said that she needed to go vegan. If she didn't go vegan, she was never going to get pregnant. She needed to cut out every single animal product. And she said, okay, fine, because she was willing to do whatever it took to make a baby. And that's what this person said. There's literally no research on the vegan diet improving fertility, but so be it. She did not feel well. It also did not work. She left. She started working with a new practitioner. The new practitioner told her that because she went vegan, she would never get pregnant. Literally. You messed up your body too much. By doing that, you won't ever get pregnant now. And she was more promoting a very like carnivore style diet. 2 very different approaches. So when she came in and we started chatting, she was like, I have a lot of food fear. Valid. I don't know what the hell to eat. Valid, because she's been sold 2 very different ideals of what healthy eating for fertility looked like, neither of which were actually backed by science or research in the fertility space or tailor-made to her body and approach. That's the internet. So there's a lot of extreme ideas out there. And this, I guess, has kind of come into 2 different sort of prong approach of ideas of like, A, it doesn't need to be all or nothing to make a positive impact. And B, we really, really need to make sure that we are following suggestions and building out a plan that is based on the research and is based on your body. The second one I term simplicity. So I do think that this journey can be complex, but I think it can still be simple in the complexity. And what I mean by that is kind of coming out of the last tip of how you can sometimes feel like there's a lot of things you need to change or a lot of things you need to do. And I said, you don't need to do all or nothing. That also means that you can take a very low and slow approach. And so the best way, we talk about this in boot camp, the best way to stay consistent with a habit is to start with just one thing at a time. And so we don't, either male or female. And if you're approaching your male partner and you're like, I really want you to, do X, Y, Z, maybe it's, can we please try X? Because this is the research I read, or this is the podcast I listened to. Here, why don't you listen to it so that you understand why I'm asking this? And once X is taken care of, then we add Y, and then we add Z. We don't have to do everything all at once. We can take the simplistic approach of just going one small strategic step at a time and habit stacking so that it doesn't feel like we're making this huge lifestyle overhaul overnight. This is something that I do with myself when I'm like in a rut and know I need to make change. It's like, okay, these are the things that I think I can do better, and this is what I'm going to start with. And then I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to get really good at those things. And then I'm going to do that. And then I'm maybe going to fall backwards a little bit. And then I'm going to add that back in, like we're human. We're allowed to be human. And we're allowed to actually take things on the slow side. And I know that the word slow can be very triggering in the fertility community because obviously you all feel like there's a clock a ticking, right? But if the one thing I've learned in all this time of supporting couples, it's that consistency is 5,000 times more important than you doing all the things. You being consistent with a few very targeted changes is way more valuable than you trying to do all the things but not doing them consistently because it's too much and it's too heavy. And so I find with our male partners, especially when I'm building out their plans, I do take a very low and slow approach. And then we add things in as needed over time. And then the last one, to just kind of like tie a bow on all of this, and we've been saying this whole time, but it's the research, it's the evidence. I think it's really important if you, and I'm speaking to the male partner here, but if you're listening and you are just feeling like you're just not quite there yet, I think really digging into the why is this important aspect of the research and the evidence, but also the why is this important aspect to your wife or partner as well, right? I think coming at this from like a, maybe I'm not ready, but in terms of being a partner, this is what's needed of me right now, is just as valuable. But the reality is that whether or not you've been trying for 1 cycle or 18 cycles, getting some testing and working to optimize your fertility, there's no such thing as too early. Because if there are things that we find, it's going to take time to make positive change. And being proactive with your time, regardless of your age or how long you've been trying, is so incredibly important to make sure that you guys can have the dream family that you want, the family that you've been talking about at night, probably even before you got married, right? So I think going through the research, taking it low and slow, removing that aspect of all or nothing, coming at this from companionship and partnership, using the statistics and knowing that giving a sample is not really that bad. All of those things are so important to really just talk about and flush out in the conversation of your partner still maybe feeling a little bit skeptical. Hopefully you share this episode with them so that they can kind of hear it from someone else. Because that's another thing too. This is actually why I think the podcast helps in that regard with our clients when their partners are like, I don't really know, is because it's one thing for you to sit down at the dinner table and say, I read this today, so I bought you this supplement, here, take it. And for me to say, this result on your semen analysis, here's the research, here's what we can do to help support that. And to hear it from someone else, also from a doctor, can always be helpful, but even just from a third party can just come a little bit easier, right? So that's another thing. Share the podcast, and thank you for all of you who already do. Honestly, I appreciate it so much. This is a labor of love. I love making the podcast. And in order for it to grow and to reach more couples that are looking for fertility support, you guys sharing and downloading and rating and reviewing, all of those things show the podcast platform that this is good information. And when anyone starts to search fertility, we will start to come up. So for those of you doing those things for me already, I really appreciate it. If you're new to the podcast, check us out. Leave us a rating and review, share with your friends and family, share with your partner, have them listen to some of the male episodes, and even share with your partner some of the episodes that are more female centric, but that might help them understand you and your journey a little bit better. I think that this is a really important conversation, and we could go at this from many different angles, but the reality is that male testing and then having proper male support is just as important as female testing and female support. And we really need to start talking about this more. And hopefully in my lifetime, we will see more male fertility support and talk. We're seeing a change already, right? We're seeing people talk about miscarriage more out on social media and in mainstream medicine. And I do think we will start to see a shift of more men feeling comfortable and confident to come forward and share their stories. And in time, it will be less difficult and challenging to take these steps. But for now, just really lean into the research, lean into the fact that this can be simple, and go and get tested and get the support that you need, because it really is going to make a huge, huge difference for you. So hopefully this conversation was helpful, and I will see you guys in the next episode.